The air over the Yuma-proving ground shimmered, a visible distortion of heat rising from baked earth and steel. It tasted of dust and burnt propellant. On the extreme range line, a group of operators, clad in the casual arrogance of proven men, were having a bad day. Their subdued multicam patterns were dark with sweat, and the banter that usually flowed as easily as rifle oil had soured into clipped frustration. They were Naval Special Warfare, a sea-air-land team whose reputation preceded them onto every training rotation, and they were failing. The target was a 36-inch plate 5,000 meters distant, a speck of white against a brown berm that even the best optics struggled to resolve. It was a technology demonstration, a test of a new integrated sensor and ballistics package. For the SEALs, it was a challenge, a new peak to conquer. For the last 3 hours, the peak had remained unconquered. Lieutenant Decker, team lead, leaned away from the spotter scope, rubbing his eyes. No joy. Mirage is a killer. Winds switching every 200 meters up the valley. It's a ghost. His spotter, a petty officer first class named Rivas, grunted. We're getting the data. The Kestrel is feeding the solver. The numbers look good. They're just not right. He gestured at the massive 416 Barrett rifle resting on its bipod, its suppressor bleeding heat into the already scorching air. This gun can make the shot. We can't. The rest of the team lounged in the scant shade of a canvas awning, their conversation a low murmur of excuses and technical complaints. The atmospheric pressure, the inconsistent powder burn, the Coriolis effect at that extreme latitude. Everything was a factor, and everything was, for them, an adversary. Into this circle of masculine frustration walked Commander Eva Rostova. She was not tall, and her uniform, a standard Navy working uniform, was crisply maintained but otherwise unremarkable. She carried a small, hardened data slate and moved with a quiet economy of motion that made her seem to fade into the background. She had been observing from a distance for the better part of an hour, her expression neutral, her presence going largely unnoticed until she stepped under their awning. Decker turned, his irritation finding a new, easier target. He looked her up and down, taking in the silver oak leaf on her collar. A commander, a staff officer, probably logistics or intel, down from headquarters to check a box on a form. "Can we help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone dripping with a condescending courtesy that was more insulting than an open slur. Rostova's gaze was not on him, but on the data streaming to a large monitor nearby, showing wind vectors, temperature layers, and barometric pressure readings from a dozen remote sensors. "The latency in your sensor network is creating a false ballistic solution," she stated, her voice calm and even. "Your data is 30 seconds old by the time your solver processes it. At this range, that's a 70-meter drift error." A ripple of laughter went through the assembled operators. Decker's lips curled into a smirk. "Is that so? Appreciate the tip, Commander. We'll be sure to reboot the internet." The men chuckled again. Rostova's expression didn't change. She looked from the screen to the distant target, then to the rifle. "The system is performing to specification. The user is failing to account for its parameters." Decker's smirk vanished. He stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. "Listen, Commander, we've been shooting long range since before you were probably commissioned. We know our gear. We know the science. This shot, right here, right now, is damn near impossible. So why don't you go back to your air-conditioned office and let the men work?" Rostova met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were a pale, dispassionate gray. "It's not impossible. It's a mathematics problem. You're using the wrong equation." The sheer audacity of her statement silenced them. Rivas, the spotter, finally spoke up, unable to contain his disbelief. "The wrong equation? We're using the applied ballistics solver. It's the best in the world." "It's a good solver," Rostova conceded. A minor allowance that sounded more like a clinical diagnosis. "But it's a generalized tool. It cannot account for polymorphic frequency hopping patterns in the sensor data stream without a custom decryption key. You are receiving the public broadcast signal, which is intentionally degraded for latency. It's a security feature." Decker crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "And I suppose you have this magic key." "I do," she said simply. Her eyes went back to the rifle. "May I?" The question was so unexpected, so completely out of bounds with the established order of this place, that for a moment, no one knew how to react. Then the laughter erupted, louder and harsher this time. It was a dam of frustration breaking. "You want to try?" Rivas choked out, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Commander, with all due respect, this isn't a PowerPoint presentation. That rifle has more recoil than a small car. You could get hurt." "I'm aware of the weapon's characteristics," she replied, her tone unchanged. "I request permission to attempt a single shot to calibrate the system." Decker held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "You hear that, boys? The commander wants to calibrate the system." He looked at her, his eyes full of pitying contempt. "Sure, be my guest. Go ahead. Don't say we didn't warn you." He gestured grandly toward the firing mat. He expected her to balk, to realize the absurdity of her request and retreat in embarrassment. He expected her to be intimidated by the weapon, by their collective expertise, by the sheer physics of the problem. She did none of those things. Instead, she gave a single, formal nod. She did not approach the rifle. She turned and walked away from the firing line, her back straight, her pace unhurried. The sound of their renewed, unrestrained laughter followed her across the baked earth until she was gone. Decker shook his head, a triumphant grin on his face. Desk jockeys. Unbelievable. He turned back to the scope, the incident already forgotten. Another amusing story of a RMF getting out of her depth. Back in the sterile, chilled environment of her temporary quarters, Commander Rostova placed the data slate on a small desk. She connected it to a ruggedized laptop. On the screen, a log file was open. She began to type, her fingers moving with quiet precision. 14:32 Zulu. YPG Range 4. Observation of Project Oracle Sensor Net Calibration Test. Test subjects, NSW Team 3, failed to achieve impact at 5,000 m over a period of 187 minutes. Cause: inability to interpret proprietary data stream, leading to persistent ballistic calculation errors. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. 14:41 Zulu. Verbal exchange with test team lead, Lieutenant Decker. Team displayed hostility toward diagnostic input. Mockery noted regarding rank, gender, and non-operator status. Request to perform system calibration shot was met with derision. Formal request logged. She saved the entry. On her screen, she pulled up the live feed from the range's optical surveillance system. A small window showed Decker and his team, still struggling. She cross-referenced the video's timecode with her log entry. The audio was clear. Every dismissive word, every condescending laugh, was now part of a permanent record, archived on a secure server thousands of miles away. Documentation over escalation. It was a principle she had lived by for 15 years. Proof was a weapon far more powerful than pride. She turned from the screen and walked to a long, heavy-duty Pelican case that sat against the far wall. She unlatched it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a standard-issue weapon. It was a rifle built around a Falker defense action, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, but every other component was bespoke. The carbon fiber barrel was wrapped in a strange, matte black material that acted as a heat sink. The stock was a minimalist chassis of titanium and polymer, adjusted to her precise measurements. The optic was a Hensoldt ZF, but it was wired into a custom-built processing unit that sat beside it. She lifted the rifle from its case. The weight was substantial, but she held it with an easy familiarity. She began her preparation ritual. It was a silent, methodical process. She checked the torque on the scope rings, not with a wrench, but with a calibrated driver that beeped when the exact Newton-meter setting was reached. She cleaned the barrel with a single, slow pass of a patch, her movements fluid and economical. She did not touch the ammunition. Each of the 20 rounds in the case had been hand-loaded by her, the powder charge measured to the single grain, the bullets seated to 1/1000th of an inch. Each casing was logged, its history known. Her focus was on the data. She put on a pair of augmented reality glasses. A holographic map of the Yuma Valley shimmered into existence in the center of the room. It was not a simple topographical map. It was a living, breathing model of the environment between the firing line and the target. Lines of green, yellow, and red flowed through it, representing wind speed and direction at different altitudes. Shimmering zones of blue and orange showed thermal updrafts and cool air pockets. It was the raw, undegraded data from the Oracle sensor net, the data she had the key to unlock. Her system was not just receiving it. It was visualizing it, turning a storm of numbers into a tangible landscape. For an hour, she simply watched the patterns. She saw the way the wind curled around a low butte 3,000 meters out. She noted the consistent thermal lift starting at the 2,000-meter mark as the sun beat down on a patch of dark rock. She saw the subtle, almost imperceptible Coriolis drift that the standard solvers were miscalculating by a fraction of a degree, a fraction that became a 50-meter miss at the final destination. She picked up a single cartridge from the case. On its base, almost too small to see, was an emblem. A phoenix, its wings spread wide, encircled by the words Fides in Tenebris, faith in darkness, a token from a past operation, a unit that did not officially exist. She held it for a moment, the cool brass a familiar weight in her palm. Then she placed it back in the case and closed the lid. The preparation was complete. The next morning, a summons arrived. Not a casual request, but a formal, written order delivered by a stern-faced master-at-arms. She was to report to the base commander's office at 0900. When she arrived, Lieutenant Decker and his entire team were already there, standing at parade rest. The base commander, Captain Wallace, was a man who valued the pristine image of his command above all else. He saw the SEALs as the tip of his spear, a source of reflected glory. He saw Rostova as an administrative annoyance. "Commander," Wallace began, his voice tight with displeasure, "I have here a formal complaint, filed by Lieutenant Decker. It states that yesterday, you interfered with a critical live-fire exercise, ignored safety protocols, and attempted to operate a weapon system for which you are not qualified, creating a hazardous situation." Decker stood impassively, his face a mask of professional concern. It was a brilliant move. He had reframed her quiet request as a dangerous breach of protocol. He had used the system against her. "The lieutenant and his men are among the finest marksmen in the entire United States Navy," Wallace continued, his voice rising. "Their assessment of a situation on the range carries significant weight. They say you were a risk, a liability." Rostova stood in silence, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She did not argue. She did not offer her side of the story. She waited. "However," Wallace said, leaning back in his chair, "you are a commander. I cannot simply ignore your rank. So we are going to settle this." Procedurally, he looked at Decker, then back at her. "Lieutenant Decker has proposed a solution I find equitable. He has withdrawn the official safety complaint on the condition that you agree to a formal qualification test. To verify your credentials, as it were. It was a trap, a piece of institutional theater designed for her public humiliation. Refusing would be seen as an admission of guilt. Accepting would mean being forced to attempt the impossible shot in front of the entire command. "The test will take place at 1300 today," Wallace said, a note of finality in his voice. "You will be given one rifle, one spotter, and one shot to hit the 5,000-meter target. Master Chief Valerius, the range master, will officiate. If you succeed, the matter is dropped. If you fail, I will be forced to attach a formal letter of reprimand to your permanent record for gross incompetence and endangerment. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Captain," Rostova said. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was as calm as it had been on the range. Decker's expression was one of cold triumph. He had her. She had walked right into it. The entire base would be watching. The entire base would see the little female commander fail spectacularly. He and his men would be vindicated, their status as the untouchable elite reaffirmed. The air at Range 4 was different this time. The casual atmosphere was gone, replaced by a tense, formal silence. Nearly 100 personnel lined the observation area behind the firing line. Captain Wallace was there, along with his executive officer and most of the senior staff. Decker and his team stood together, arms crossed, their faces set in grim satisfaction. Master Chief Petty Officer Valerius met Rostova at the firing point. He was a legend, a man who had been running ranges since before most of the operators present were born. His face was a roadmap of deserts and jungles, his eyes missing nothing. He held a clipboard. "Commander," he said, his voice a low gravel. "The rules are simple. One shot. You will be spotted by Petty Officer Rivas." He gestured to Decker's spotter, who stepped forward with a smirk. This was the final turn of the screw, forcing her to rely on one of her tormentors. "You may use your own weapon and optic, as per range qualification regulations. You have 15 minutes to prepare once you are on the mat. Do you understand?" "I understand, Master Chief," Rostova replied. She laid out her rifle, the strange, custom-built weapon drawing curious and skeptical murmurs from the crowd. She attached the small processing unit to the optics rail. She lay down on the mat, her movements precise and unhurried. Rivas set up his spotting scope beside her, an exaggerated sigh escaping his lips. "Just tell me when you're ready to send it, ma'am," he said, his tone bored. "Try not to dislocate your shoulder." Rostova ignored him. She looked through her scope. The world snapped into focus, but it was overlaid with data. A stream of numbers scrolled down the right side of her view. A faint, glowing line arched through the center, representing the predicted flight path of the bullet. It was the visualization of the solution she had prepared for last night. She took a deep breath, then another. She began to speak, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the range microphone for all to hear. It was part of the procedure to announce the firing solution. Target distance, 5,010 meters. Ammunition, 338 Lapua Magnum, 300 grain solid projectile. Muzzle velocity, 2,950 feet per second. She paused, taking another breath. Rivas was already looking bored, expecting a simple wind and elevation call. "Atmospherics," she continued. "Barometric pressure, 2988 and falling. Temperature at firing point, 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 12%. Crosswind at muzzle, 3 miles per hour from 2 o'clock. The crowd was silent. This was standard stuff. Wind at transect 1,000 meters, 7 miles per hour from 3:30. Thermal updraft beginning at 2,100 meters, creating a vertical deflection of 12 mils. Wind at transect 2, 3,500 meters, shearing to 12 miles per hour from 1 o'clock. Coriolis effect requires 41 mils left hold. Spin drift, 19 mils right. A murmur went through the operators. The level of detail was insane. No one could calculate that many variables. Rivas stared at her, his smirk gone, replaced by a look of utter confusion. Where was she getting this data? "Final firing solution," Rostova concluded, her voice a flat, confident monotone. "Elevation 142.75 minutes of angle. Windage 29.5 minutes of angle left." She adjusted the huge knobs on her scope, the clicks audible in the tense silence. She settled her body behind the rifle, becoming part of the machine. Her breathing slowed. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3. "Spotter, are you ready?" she asked, her voice unchanged. Rivas was rattled. He fumbled to get his eye back on the scope. Yeah, ready. Send it." There was no final, dramatic pause. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, a deep, concussive boom that slammed into the chests of the onlookers. The weapon pushed back into her shoulder, but she absorbed the recoil perfectly, her body a practiced shock absorber. The muzzle brake deflected a storm of dust and pebbles to the sides. The brass casing ejected in a clean, high arc. And then, there was only silence. The silence of waiting. 1 second. 2. The bullet was crossing the first kilometer. 3 seconds. 4. It was passing through the thermal updraft she had predicted, rising slightly. 5 seconds. 6. It encountered the wind shear, a tiny sliver of machined copper and lead fighting a battle with an invisible force. 7 seconds. 8. The crowd held its collective breath. Decker's face was a stone mask of disbelief. He was rerunning the numbers in his head. They were impossible. 8.5 seconds after the shot had been fired, a sound returned from across the valley. Not the sharp crack of a supersonic impact, but a deep, resonant clang, the sound of a heavy projectile hitting hardened steel. It was faint, distorted by distance, but it was unmistakable. In the observation area, Master Chief Valerius was looking through a set of high-powered Fujinon binoculars mounted on a tripod. He stood frozen for a long moment, then slowly lowered them. He keyed the microphone on his console. His voice, rough as gravel, boomed across the range, stripped of all emotion. Impact. I repeat, we have an impact. On the large monitor, the feed from the target camera flickered to life. It showed the white steel plate, and in the precise geometric center, there was a fresh black hole, a perfect circular punctuation mark. A wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd, so profound it felt louder than the shot itself. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the screen, then at the small, quiet woman getting up from the firing mat, then back at the screen. Lieutenant Decker's jaw was slack. Rivas was staring through his scope as if he had seen a ghost. They had called it impossible, and she had done it. In one shot, Commander Rostova showed no emotion. She calmly cleared her weapon, placed a chamber flag in the breech, and stood up. She began to pack her equipment with the same methodical precision she had shown in setting it up. The pivot had occurred. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was the one who had pushed it. The culture of a military base is an ecosystem, sensitive to the slightest change. The shot was a seismic event. The change was immediate and profound. The open mockery that had followed Commander Rostova vanished overnight. In its place was a thick, unsettled silence. When she walked into the dining facility, conversations would hush. Operators who had once looked through her now watched her with a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. They would part ways for her in corridors, their eyes downcast. Lieutenant Decker and his team became pariahs. Their swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive anger. Other teams avoided them. Their failure on the range, once a private frustration, was now a public spectacle, made infinitely worse by the fact that the person who had shown them up was the very woman they had so viciously ridiculed. The story of the shot spread like wildfire, embellished with each telling. Some said she had done it with her eyes closed. Others whispered she had access to some secret satellite technology. The truth, that it was simply a matter of superior mathematics and discipline, was too mundane to be believed. Lieutenant Commander Miles, an intelligence officer attached to the base command, was a man who dealt in patterns. The events on the range did not fit any pattern he knew. A staff officer with the skills of a Tier 1 sniper was an anomaly, and anomalies demanded investigation. In the quiet of his office, he used his high-level security clearance to access Commander Eva Rostova's file. He expected to find a typical officer's record: schools, staff tours, a steady but unremarkable progression. What he found made him lean back in his chair, his breath catching in his throat. The file was 90% redacted. Huge blocks of text were blacked out, labeled with classifications he had only ever read about in briefings. But what was visible was astonishing. Ph.D. in signal processing from Caltech. Top honors from the Naval Postgraduate School in Electronic Warfare. A single unredacted line in a long list of awards. A Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor, with a citation that was completely blacked out except for the words, "for extraordinary heroism in connection with clandestine operations of great responsibility." And then he saw the emblem, a digital watermark on the file's header. Phoenix. Project Oracle. It was a deep black signals intelligence program, so secret that its very existence was denied. It wasn't just a sensor net on a training range. It was a revolutionary global C4I system. And Commander Rostova wasn't just a user. Her name was on the original design patents. She had built it. Miles picked up his secure phone. He knew who he had to call. Captain Thorne, Rostova's actual commanding officer, was based out of a nondescript building in Virginia. Thorne listened patiently as Miles recounted the entire story. The mockery, the formal complaint, the forced qualification, the impossible shot. When Miles finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Thorne's voice came back, cold as ice. "Lieutenant Commander, I want you to package every piece of evidence you have. The range surveillance video with audio. The official complaint filed by Lieutenant Decker. The range logs from Master Chief Valerius. The digital record of Commander Rostova's shot. Send it to me via classified courier. I will be on the first transport to your location. This is not a training issue anymore. This is a command issue." The formal hearing was convened not in a courtroom, but in a secure video teleconference facility, a sterile room with gray walls and the faint hum of electronics. Captain Wallace presided, looking deeply uncomfortable. On one side of the table sat Lieutenant Decker and his team, their lawyer between them. On the other sat Commander Rostova, alone. Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Commander Miles sat behind her, observing. Wallace began, reading from a prepared statement about maintaining good order and discipline. He clearly wanted to make this go away quickly, to issue a minor rebuke and move on. Captain Thorne interrupted him. "With all due respect, Captain Wallace, this is not a matter of discipline. It is a matter of a formal, written statement that appears to be demonstrably false, submitted for the purposes of damaging the career of a fellow officer. I request we review the evidence." Reluctantly, Wallace agreed. Miles dimmed the lights and activated the large screen on the wall. The first file he played was the surveillance footage from the range. The audio was crystal clear. The entire room listened as Decker and his team's voices filled the space. Their condescending tones, their crude jokes, the cascade of laughter. They watched as Decker loomed over the smaller woman, telling her to go back to her office and let the men work. When the video ended, the room was thick with a tense, embarrassed silence. Decker's face was pale. Next, Miles displayed the official complaint Decker had filed. He read the key phrases aloud, interfered with a critical live-fire exercise, ignored safety protocols, creating a hazardous situation. Then, he played the second video, the qualification test. The camera angle was wide, showing the entire gallery of onlookers. It showed Rostova's calm, methodical setup. The audio broadcast her impossible calculations. The rifle fired, the agonizingly long wait, and then the digital feed from the target cam showing the perfect central hit. When the lights came up, Thorne spoke, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "Captain Wallace, Lieutenant Decker, what you have just witnessed is a contradiction. On one hand, we have a formal accusation that Commander Rostova is incompetent and a danger on the range. On the other, we have digital proof that she is, in fact, one of the most capable marksmen any of us have ever seen. Both cannot be true." Decker's lawyer began to speak about the subjective nature of safety assessments, but Thorne held up a hand. "Let's move beyond the subjective. Let's talk about the objective purpose of Commander Rostova's presence at Yuma Proving Ground." He nodded to Miles, who brought up a new slide. It was a heavily redacted document, but the title was clear: Project Oracle, Phase 4 Sensor Net Calibration and Field Validation. Thorne addressed the room. Commander Rostova was not at Range 4 to observe. She was there as the lead engineer and program manager for the very sensor system your team was tasked with testing, Lieutenant. He looked directly at Decker. "The system is named Oracle. She designed it. She built it. She wrote the code. Her job, the entire reason she was on that range, was to calibrate it. When she approached your team with diagnostic input about data latency, she was not an interfering staff officer. She was the chief architect of the system telling you, the end user, that you were using it incorrectly." The air went out of the room. Decker stared at Rostova, his mouth slightly agape. The woman he had dismissed as a desk jockey, a liability, was the creator of the advanced technology he had been so proud to test. His mockery had not been directed at an inferior, but at the source of his own cutting-edge equipment. Her request to fire a single shot, Thorne continued, his voice relentless, was not an act of ego. It was an attempt to perform a diagnostic function to complete her mission, a mission you were actively impeding. Your formal complaint was therefore not just false. It was an act of professional sabotage against a critical national security program. You didn't just lie, Lieutenant. You filed a false report that interfered with the operational readiness of the United States Navy. Captain Wallace looked as if he had been struck. His attempt to protect his star team had backfired spectacularly, exposing him as a fool who had nearly derailed a black project. His face was ashen. Decker was broken. He slumped in his chair, the arrogance and confidence completely stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He had built his entire identity on being the best, the elite. In the space of 10 minutes, that identity had been dismantled by quiet, irrefutable proof. The next day, a base-wide formation was called. It was an unusual event, reserved for major announcements or visiting dignitaries. The entire command stood in neat rows under the unforgiving Arizona sun. Captain Wallace stood at the podium, his posture stiff. He read the official findings of the hearing. He publicly retracted the letter of reprimand he had threatened to issue to Commander Rostova and offered a formal, public apology for his failure in judgment. He then announced that Lieutenant Decker and his entire team had been found guilty at an Article 15 hearing of making a false official statement and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. They were reduced in rank by 1 grade, would forfeit a month's pay, and were removed from operational status pending a full review of their fitness for duty. As the formation was dismissed, the assembled personnel began to disperse, but a space cleared around Commander Rostova. No one approached her. They just watched. Then, a figure broke from the crowd. It was Master Chief Valerius. He walked directly to her, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of her and came to attention. He said nothing. Instead, he reached up to his own uniform. On his chest, among a sea of ribbons and badges, was a small cloth patch. It was worn, the threads faded from years in the sun. It depicted a rifle crossed with a lightning bolt. It was the unofficial but highly revered Master Range Instructor patch, a token awarded only by the cadre at the most advanced sniper schools, and only to those who demonstrated a level of skill that bordered on supernatural. Valerius had earned his 30 years ago. With deliberate movements, he detached the patch from his uniform. He held it out in the palm of his hand to Rostova. It was not a request. It was an offering, a transfer of legacy, a silent, profound apology from the institution's memory. Rostova looked at the patch, then at the old Master Chief's eyes. She saw in them a deep, hard-won respect. She took the patch and gave a slight, formal nod. He returned the nod, rendered a slow, perfect salute, held it for a beat, then turned and walked away. One by one, other operators, men who had stood by and laughed or said nothing, began to approach. A young petty officer, one of Decker's team who had been reassigned, stopped before her, his face filled with shame. He did not speak. He simply saluted. She returned it crisply. Another followed, and another, a first salute offered upward by those who had once mocked downward. It was the beginning of a cultural recalibration, paid for with humiliation and validated by competence. The harsh desert light had softened to the orange glow of late afternoon. Commander Rostova was back in the cool, quiet dark of the operations center. The holographic map of the Yuma Valley was gone, replaced by a new projection. A jagged coastline, thousands of miles away, its waters dotted with the electronic signatures of hostile naval assets. The door hissed open and Captain Thorne entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. She accepted it with a quiet murmur of thanks. The fallout was extensive, Thorne said, looking at the new map. Wallace is being reassigned. Decker's career is over. They're rebuilding that entire SEAL platoon from scratch. You made quite an impression, Eva. She took a sip of the coffee, her eyes fixed on the map. She had replaced the standard Navy commander's insignia on her collar. In its place was the small, worn patch Valerius had given her. On the sleeve of her uniform, just visible in the blue light of the hologram, was a small, embroidered phoenix, its wings spread. Fides Antenebris, faith in the signal. Their pride made them blind, she said, her voice a low murmur. They confused confidence with competence. They saw the uniform, not the function. They created a procedural vulnerability, and it was exploited. And the project? Thorne asked. Oracle is fully calibrated, she replied. The network is stable. We can now accurately model ballistic solutions through 4 layers of atmospheric distortion in real time. The error margin is less than 10 centimeters at 6,000 meters. Thorne nodded, a small, grim smile on his face. Good. Because your next assignment is loading, he gestured to the hostile coastline on the map. They think their coastal defenses are impenetrable. They think their electronic warfare can blind us. They are overconfident. Rostova's gaze sharpened, her focus absolute. The events of the past few days were already receding, filed away, a closed loop. The mockery, the humiliation, the vindication. It was all just noise. The signal was what mattered. The mission. She reached out and touched the holographic display, zooming in on a specific harbor, her mind already running the new calculations, solving the next impossible problem. Thorne watched her for a moment, the quiet, unassuming officer who wielded mathematics and physics like a weapon. He thought of the wreckage of Decker's career, the humbling of an entire command, the restoration of a proper, merit-based order. He turned to leave her to her work. As he reached the door, he paused. It was a necessary thing you did here, Commander, but a messy 1-inch. Rostova did not look up from the map. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls, tracing firing solutions for weapons that had not yet been deployed. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the servers processing her commands. The culture was better. The mission was already loading. Her voice was the final, quiet entry in the log of the entire affair. Correction was achieved.